Hi, how you doing?
I'm doing good. The fake hello after we've been talking for 3 minutes.
Yeah, well, I don't, yeah, exactly. It's okay. Everyone knows by now. It's all understood, right?
It's all understood because, I just logged in and, we're doing this virtually. So I'm sitting here in my basement in Toronto. I built this room within my basement in the pandemic. Like the pandemic started, I was like, well, I immediately need a room,
Oh, wow. You did a pandemic room. That's great.
Yeah.
Actually, that's true of my garage too, is that this was it was already finished, but I like redid it over the pandemic the same way. Yeah.
Tell me more. So the pandemic hit. First of all, how did that affect you? Because for me, it was like I was traveling a ton, giving speeches. They were all immediately canceled. So I was like, I'm not only do I need a room, I'm gonna be in this room for a long time.
Yeah. I felt bad how little it affected me, at least in the immediate, because I was deep in a schedule of we had 2 little kids. We still have 2 little kids, but they were very little then. And we had moved to this house that had a finished garage. And I'd had a studio space outside the house for years and years. But when we moved here, I started working in the garage instead. And so my commute was just, the 12 feet from the house to the garage every day. And I was deep in some production of books that those things go on for, 6 to 8 months or something like that. And then the kids were home. And so my day changed very little. I felt horrible about it because everyone else was just like having to adjust. And it was these, how do you, I couldn't imagine. And then I was going back and still drawing my turtles every day the way I had been because my deadlines were still what they were. And the books were still going to come out. It was unclear how that was going to go. But like my deadlines remained, everything kind of stayed. And I was just like, it felt like I was below the water of the storm. You know what I mean? Where you every now and then a piece of a ship would float down into your view, but you were underneath the ocean of all the waves of it. It was really a strange feeling.
Wow. What a great metaphor. Yeah. Below the water of the storm, every now and then a little piece of the ship ahead would float down. I love that. I love that visual.
Yeah, it drops down and you're like, oh, it must be pretty bad up there.
Yeah, exactly.
And it would get, you'd get reminders whenever you'd go out. And like we had very little kids, and so we didn't have any childcare after that. And they were so small, and like parks and things, all that stuff was gone. And we just figured all that stuff out. So that was tough, but it wasn't, professionally speaking, I was very lucky in a lot of ways. I had this escape that remained an escape. Even more so, and it stayed steady.
But it did provoke you to redo this garage.
Yeah. That's
and I'm
true.
looking at you just for people that are listening. Most of our listenership is like still listeners, kind of old school podcast that way. Mm-hmm. I can see you. You're wearing a red baseball cap. You've got like a teal shirt on. A navy blue sweater or chemise.
This is kind of the uniform these days. Yeah,
I love it. You look great. You got the great stash too. It's like a nice.
Oh yeah, I grew this. There was a reason. Oh, there's a show called Over the Garden Wall. It's like a mini series the Cartoon Network made like 10 years ago, and our son got really into it. Both kids did actually, and they were both. There's 2 like brothers in it that are wandering around this landscape, and they were both those guys for Halloween. And there's also a school teacher in one of the episodes, like an old timey 1-room school teacher kind of thing, and she's lamenting her boyfriend who's run off. He's a no good 2-timing handsome man, is how she puts it, I think. And so my wife wanted to be the school teacher. She loves that character. And I was the no good 2-timing handsome man, except that he, most of the time, is stuck in a gorilla suit in the episode. And the only thing, so I was that guy stuck in a gorilla suit, but the only thing to really identify me as not just a guy in a gorilla suit, but as that particular man in a gorilla suit was that he had like a dandy mustache. And so I spent like 2 months trying to grow this thing in anticipation of this. And then I was like a month after Halloween, I was like, I don't think I'm kidding anymore. I think I have a mustache. And it's just stayed. I think one of the kids said something nice at one point. And I don't know, with mustaches, you're like water in the desert. Anyone who says anything small, I feel like, well, it's not bad. You're like, okay, that's the rest of my life then. Not bad. I'm going to keep it for the rest of my life. And like, that's just how it's felt since then. I don't know. It's one of those things. It
looks good, and as you know, like when guys grow facial hair, you mostly get compliments from other men. in the facial hair
Yeah,
game.
that's true too. They're like, nice one. The guy in our coffee shop was like, looked up one day. He's like, oh, that's coming along nice. And then he grew one after that. And I was like, I'm keeping this thing. That's the highest. Like, how do you do better than that? The coffee shop guy grows one after that. Like, maybe not. Maybe he was seeing them around. I'm not the only one with these things these days.
No, but
like,
you're right. The coffee shop barista is usually like a fashion icon in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, exactly.
Usually, they've got like a style.
Coffee baristas have been starting this. I think it's their fault we're here mustache-wise anyway. So it's fine. It's full circle. But I don't know. The other thing I realized about it was that someone asked a while ago, I always wear hats. I've worn hats since like 6th or 7th grade.
Yeah, all your book photos and stuff, right?
Yeah, it's always a hat. And someone asked about it at one point, and I was trying to get into why it is I did wear them. And in 7th grade, we moved from Toronto to Niagara Falls, and it was a rough move. I'd grown up in the suburbs of Toronto in like kind of a gentle, it turned out, like social circle, and they dropped me right into this rough situation in Niagara Falls. And I remember someone coming up to me at that school, this guy named Don Chersky, not Donald Chersky, rather, as I knew him. And he had a shaved head with spiked hair everywhere out the front. And I think he was wearing an Aerosmith t-shirt. And he comes up to me, and it was no one had talked to me in like a week. And he's like, I'm Donald. And I was like, I know, I've heard your name, because there's like 14 of us in the whole school. And he's like, you can call me Don. And I thought that was the nicest, most what was the word? Disarming, I guess. It was like a way to ingratiate in a friendly kind of motion. And from then on, I was Jonathan, and I went by John. From there on out, I was like, I want to do what Don did for me that day. If in whatever capacity I can, I changed it. But I think I also decided that wearing a hat was also a way to be like, it's not so serious. Like, let's all just relax a little bit. And it was a communication tool. I like hats, so it's handy. But I also just felt like it was two things at once. It was like, let's all just relax. But it was also something of a gentle middle finger to whatever formality may have been put on to an event. I like wearing them to like formal things too. I love a suit and a hat. I like the contradiction of that. And the mustache, it occurred to me later, does that too. You can wear just about anything, but if you have a mustache, you are kind of showing up, right? You're not totally careless. Some effort was made.
Yeah, right. It's the facial that requires, other grooming.
There's this great line. I almost put a Dennis Johnson book on this list because I love him so much too, and I just couldn't really choose one. But there's a line, I think, in Tree of Smoke, where this guy in the military, this younger guy, has an uncle who's like a higher up in the military, and he's kind of in the military because his uncle got him in, I think was the situation. And he goes to dinner at his uncle's house, and I guess he's grown a mustache in between having seen his uncle the last time. And his uncle says something along the lines of like, well, I see you've grown a mustache. And he goes, yeah. He goes, a guy with a mustache has to have a special skill. And he says, why is that? And he goes, to make up for his vanity. And I was like, oh man, I'm keeping that in my back pocket too, because that's fantastic. And it's true. It's a vain move. It's completely unnecessary. Same as a hat, which is why I like them for narrative reasons. They are emotional. They are an emotional reaction. You do not almost ever need a hat on, sometimes for the sun or something like that, but I don't wear it for that. And a mustache is even more useless than that. They are affections, right? Or affectations, that's the word, affectations. They're extras that you've decided to do, and whatever communication is being done, that's what's being done. And it's a first impression. It's so interesting.
Oh my gosh, I could just listen to you all day.
Yeah.
You are. No.
I'm sorry. I think I've had 4 cups of coffee already. That's what's going on here.
I love it. I love it. I love this energy. It's great, and it kind of makes sense to me why you have so much going on too. Like you've got the books you're writing and drawing yourself, like the Your Places series, the board books.
Board books, yeah.
You've got the Looking at Picture Books Substack, which is like, long form, regularly publishing Substack with Mac. You're doing books with Mac, by the way.
Yeah.
How Does Santa Go Down the Chimney is like my kid's favorite Christmas book of all.
No way. Oh, that's great.
We love that book. We've loved that book. That's our favorite. So we have a basket of Christmas books that kind of come out. My wife Leslie is like, maybe she's like, because it sounds like your wife's really into Halloween, right? Because I saw the Pee Wee
very
Herman
much.
dress up thing on your Instagram.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Right?
Yeah, she is really into Halloween. She decorates the whole house every year. I'd like to be the kind of dad that did that too, but she runs Halloween decorations for sure.
Yeah, but you've got the Apple TV show.
Yeah, that's been finished for a little bit, but it's on. So I feel like it is ongoing. We still hear about it.
And that counts.
Yeah.
And you've just got the first thing that strikes me is you got a lot going on, and then you hinted at the route map a little bit because, for Canadians, the route from Winnipeg to Los Angeles is not a common one, and I know that there was a big steeped adolescence in the GTA in the Greater Toronto area, like me, or about the same vintage, right? Like I'm born 79, you're like 81, is that right?
I'm 81, yeah. So it would have been the same Toronto, the same.
Yeah.
Are you from the city? Are you from like down?
Born in Oshawa.
Okay, all right.
Grew up in Oshawa and then Whitby. Yeah. So I know Markham well.
Yeah, Markham was my spot. We were in Unionville, Markham. We lived in Unionville, went to school in Markham, but it was all very blurry. But yeah, that early. We talk about suburban Toronto a lot because it's like, it was so different. Like we felt like we were on the edge of a giant field most of the time. And so it felt like rural. There were creeks and trees and stuff. And we say suburban Toronto, but it was pretty fresh.
Yeah, especially that time in the 80s and the 90s. Yeah. You got dropped into Niagara Falls. Of course, you went to Sheridan College. For those that don't know, that's the #1 kind of ranked school in Canada for animation design. Like very hard to get into. A really top-notch college. I always say this for like Canadian schools that people don't know of outside of Canada.
Yeah, well, Sheridan's a very specific one. If you're not into animation, especially when we were going to college, I wouldn't be surprised if you hadn't heard about it. It's hyper specific for that. It's kind of a career college besides, although they've gotten, I think they've gotten much more well, like renowned since then. But at the time, if you said animation, they were kind of the Cal Arts of Canada that way, where they was just like, it was tricky to get in.
Very tricky to get in. And then you go to Los Angeles, you're working for, Kung Fu Panda and Coraline and you get asked to illustrate a book and you're plunked now in LA. Like it seems like you're settled there and you got the two boys you mentioned. It's Augie and
Isaac. Yeah.
Augie and Isaac. I see their birthday posts on your feed.
Yeah.
And there was another post, but I thought it was one of your sons, but then it was Justin. And I'm like, wait, but he doesn't have a Justin.
Oh, Justin's my youngest brother. I have two brothers, Will and Justin, and those are they're both still in Ontario. Will's in Toronto, and Justin's further up north in Wyerton.
And this is probably why your Canadian sensibilities come through. Like you've been out of the country for a while, but you post pictures of yourself in Blue Jays hats. You're Canadian.
I'm homesick,
you make Canadian
certainly.
Tire Money jokes, in your Substack. So I'm catching the Canadiana off of you, and I was just curious, what's it feel like being a Canadian in the States right now or in LA right now?
Yeah, those are two different questions too, I think. Being a Canadian in the States is one thing. Being a Canadian in Los Angeles in the States is probably another. I think that it's not as sheltered as it was the first administration. The 16 one, when he was elected again, when Trump got elected again, it was kind of, there was a couple people wandering around saying the same things as they were in 16, where it's like, well, we live in this kind of liberal bubble. We're going to hear about this existentially, but practically speaking, it'll probably be pretty quiet. And then right away, it wasn't. Right away, it was a completely different situation. And Los Angeles is really funny because it's very photogenic for whatever it is you need it to be doing, like media-wise. And so there were the protests downtown that are not far from here, 15 minutes. But we were still walking our kids to school that day. And if we hadn't heard all the helicopters, we wouldn't have even known what was going on. But the pictures look like a city on fire, right? And then the city did go on fire. And we were still like, that's so spread out and so wide that your days really are sequestered to your little zones if that's how you work them or how we've set them up. And that is how we've set it up. And so it does feel a lot different this time. The city is very affected by ICE and very affected by all that stuff going on. And they like to make an example of Dem-run cities and Dem-run states and all that. And Los Angeles is both. And it feels much more in your face this time than it did, I think, the first time around, which we were lucky for that. Again, the first time it was more existential and we were thinking it was in your heads and you were wondering what kind of country this was and all that. And now we can see it much more clearly, I think. And so being a Canadian in America, it's a lot different, obviously, being a Canadian in like Ohio or being a Canadian in Florida or being a Canadian in any number. It's a huge country, right? And very different experiences with this whole journey the whole time. Being Canadian in LA has always felt a little funny. There's lots of Canadians here, and no one seems to be from here, and so everyone's kind of figuring it out. And there's no real definition of LA. I think that's where you kind of rest. Is that like there's no figure? There's some cities you can figure them out, right? They have a vibe, and you kind of click into it. But that's not how this city works. It's sort of this weird cloud that you sort of make your own vibe into. At least that's been my experience. And so you get to bring your Canada with you. Then you do get to sort of, I don't know. I think a lot of people do return for that reason. Is that like they miss a peculiar part, like they miss a specific city. I miss like when you go to Toronto, it's big, but it still has a feel to it. You know what Toronto is, or at least sections of it. And the city goes through things together. Weather goes through weather together.
Yeah.
LA doesn't go through weather together. There's nothing that groups us that way. If it snows in Toronto, everyone wakes up and has to do something about it. And almost besides an earthquake or something catastrophic, the city doesn't. That's why COVID was so wild here, is because almost the first time my living here, the whole city was involved in something collectively. It was a real trip.
That is really interesting. The city goes through things together, that kind of bonds. And yeah, you're right. And we talk about weather all the time.
Yeah.
You know, it's like it's the daily chatter. That's interesting. And what an interesting perspective, kind of from where you are. I didn't say this up front, but just a huge congratulations on your success. It's amazing.
Oh, thanks.
Well, you're in this industry that, you know, more people want to be a children's book writer than any other type of writer. It's more difficult to become one than any other kind. And it's more difficult within that to have success. I mean, I had one children's book. It was considered a huge hit, gigantic in proportions. I was told it was a massive bestseller.
I was told
it sold 35,000 copies. You've sold millions of kids' books. It's like so astronomically rare. I don't think people really realize how much of a black swan it is to be doing what you're doing.
It's a quiet job for the most part. Like I think it's hard to get perspective on it because it is so separate from both the work and from your day-to-day responses to it. And so when you travel and you find out, you know, that people have the book in different places, it kind of blows your mind because how would you intuit that? How would you guess at that? You kind of intellectually know, well, they do have my books in Japan or something like that. But until you go and sit down and people know the book in Japanese, you're like, oh man, they weren't even lying. It's here. I don't know. I think it's hard to fit that into your brain. And I think I've also seen that it can affect the work if you try and swallow all of it. If you try and internalize it because you think you ought to, because again, it's very rare, right? And so you should pay it. You should pay the scaled tribute somehow and try to hold it. It's very hard because the work depends on quiet and like weird moods. And those things can get affected when you think that it's gone big or that it's gone very well. I don't know. It's a tricky relationship to have to the work. I feel very lucky though. I think that it does mean I get to do weirder stuff than I would normally be allowed to. I think it's not an industry that often likes to take tons of chances, or at least it goes through phases where it doesn't. And I think I've been lucky sales-wise and on recognition that they kind of let me try things out. And I don't take that for granted. I try to try things out because of that. That's the one thing where I think I've learned how to spend it a little bit.
I love that. I try to try things out, and the work,
for lack of a better way of putting it, right?
And the work depends on quiet and weird moods. Well, I would say all three of your formative books have quiet and weird moods in them, but we may as well start with the one you read the first. And before we hit record, I did ask you kind of which order you thought in your life that these might have bumped into you. Mm-hmm. And when we begin, each one I'll kind of describe for the listener so they can picture holding it in a bookstore. Sure. And the first one is The Little Trilogy by Anton Chekhov, Chekhov, originally published in 1898 in the Russian journal Russkaya Mist, which I'm sure I'm saying wrong. But the cover is like this muted landscape image of a small wooden church sitting on a grassy hill, sheltered by a few trees, with a wide river or lake in the distance, pale blue and silvery grays under an expansive and subdued sky, layered with gentle clouds. At the top of the cover, we got this little rectangular box. This is Anton Chekhov in a skinny serif, all caps, above a thin line, and a title case italicized serif font saying The Little Trilogy. Below that, there's a small black band saying Pocket Essentials, which I looked up, and it's just because that is the kind of British publisher that's putting out these like pocket classics again.
Yeah.
Chekhov lived from 1860 to 1904 and was a Russian doctor, playwright, and short story writer. So interesting that he was a kind of a doctor first. He actually said, "Medicine is my lawful wife. Literature is my mistress." He died of tuberculosis. These 3 books in the little trilogy, tiny little stories, they're vast. They feel huge when you're reading them. They describe it as displaying Chekhov's genius for psychological nuance, moral ambiguity, and emotional restraint. So we get this, and they're all told through conversations of someone telling the story. So we get the story of an uptight school teacher, but it's told as a conversation between 2 guys.
Yeah.
Another of a guy like seeking pleasure in the form of gooseberries at his country estate. It's called Gooseberries, that title. And another about unspoken love. It's filed this one for Dewey Decimal Heads out there, 891.73. That would be literature / East Indo-European Celtic literature / Russian fiction. Jon, please tell us about your relationship with the Little Trilogy by Anton Chekhov.
Oh man, see, I'm already intimidated because I didn't ever study literature. I went to school for animation instead and always told myself that I would read on my own, which is probably what a lot of people tell themselves if they don't take literature like that. And so my relationship with Chekhov is really my own. I don't have a lot of analysis on these stories, and I know that there's been tons. And he was the first writer where I was like, I think like I loved him sincerely, where, you read so many books that you've heard that people love. And so you read them and they are big and they feel big the way you've been told that they are. And I think I found Chekhov on my own. I didn't know that he was big. And I can't remember even why I picked it up in the first place.
Do you remember how old you were, where you were, anything?
I think I was 17 or 18. And it was just his short stories. I hadn't read his plays or anything. We didn't read that in college. I think the first one I read of his was called The Kiss. It's an early story of his. And I wanted to make a short film of it, actually. When I was in animation school, I thought of it for a long time for my student film. It would make a great animated short, that one. But he was so, there was so much about his attitude and his writing and what wasn't said and how gentle everything was. And even though everyone's really going through it, it was never on the surface and never in the narrative. The plots weren't huge. It was, you'd finish this thing and it, like you said, it felt vast, but you couldn't even really quite say what had happened event-wise for a lot of them. And it was like, how did he do that? How did it feel like we just finished this monumental piece of work? And I can't even quite say what physically happened a lot of times. And he just like lands it. He lands it like you didn't even know what he was doing. And then suddenly you feel it just thud at the end. And you're just like, man, there was another one. And I just remember wanting to write like that, or like it was the first time I started like writing was after reading him, being like, I want to, and I can't tell whether it was like stylistic. I don't think so. I don't think I was picking him apart stylistically. Some writers, you want to do that, right? But with him, he's very, and I don't know, maybe it was the certain translations I was reading that were harder or less stylistic. Maybe in Russian, he's very stylish. I don't know. But with these 3 in particular, I think I read Gooseberries first and then found the other 2, found out that it was a trilogy. And I was so happy because mostly what I liked about Gooseberries was the format. I think all of these books, the reasons that they've been formative is the structure of them. And with these ones, these 2 guys walking across this like crazy Russian landscape, yelling at each other. And that's where you open, that's where you find them. And they're already like deep old friends and they're yelling at each other or something and they're getting lost or it's about to rain or something. It's all just so gorgeous. The structure of it, you just like, even just that setup, the construction, regardless of what he's about to do or talk about or be preoccupied with in a story. I just love 2 guys walking across a giant field looking for shelter from the rain and beginning to tell each other a story. I think that's just such a gorgeous setup. And so I was so happy to find that there were 2 more because I just get to hang out with those 2 guys for 2 more stories. And I know there's so much more going on, but that's why I think I go back to those stories, just to hang out with those 2 guys who, they disappear for large parts of those stories. You go into, like you say, they begin to explain a story and then you go in there instead and you come back out to these other 2 guys every now and then. But you're always aware that you're with them. You're always sitting in the barn with them or in a firelit room or something like that. You can feel that. And there's the construction of it is just amazing. I'd never read stories that worked like that before.
That's such an astute point, the setting within the setting, because you're right. It's two guys walking, kind of chilling in a barn, and then they tell the story. That's the bulk of the story, and then it kind of returns at the end to them, and then it stays with them for the next one, goes somewhere else. Like it's like your studio within your home, or your
It's cozy.
your Canadianness inside your American home, and there's a place within a place there. You of course have your own trilogy now. The Hat Trilogy,
the Hat
combining
Trilogy,
the Hat, calling back to our Hat conversation.
Yeah.
The structure of 3, of course, pops out to me a little bit.
I think too, the third book in that trilogy is about 2 turtles, and when you meet them, they're old friends by then. And I think that was direct, really. Like, it was just like how he does that too, how he begins to, I'm not sure he ever says they were 2 old friends who'd known each other so-and-so. He does it through how they speak to each other and what they don't say. And their mannerisms are so well worn by the time you meet them that I always admired that there was something so deft in how he explained how well they knew each other. And I always wanted to try for that, being like, how do we show that 2 people have known each other for this long without saying so? What is that? What's the quality in that kind of a relationship? And I tried for that in the turtle one in a smaller way, being like, how the stakes of that book are like, we should care if they break up. It should be a shame if one of them betrayed the other and it was the destruction of the relationship. But I don't want to open the book. There's no narrator anyway to say like, these 2 are friends. So how do you show it? And like, he would do that. He would do that in those stories to show this ancient relationship that was like, it survived offense all the time. They were always yelling at each other and making fun of each other and stuff. But you knew it wasn't going anywhere. They weren't going to split up on the field or anything. They were going to go to the same place together. It just felt so nice to sit in that.
Yeah, what a great point. And also that, I mean, one thing I often hear when I read reviews of your books is your conjured magic and creating negative space and the what's not said and what's off the page. And you just described Chekhov doing that with the fact that these 2 guys, we get to know that they're good friends, but it's never said, it's never explicit that way. And I've heard you talk
all
on
off the page with him.
It's all off the page, right? Like I heard you talk to Tom Power a few years ago on CBCQ, and you talk a little bit about how, your character's eyeballs are kind of meant for the kids, but the lines are meant for the adults because kids kind of read ahead through visuals. Yeah. I thought that was maybe one of your writing craft tricks or tips. I always think of this show in the back of my mind as, without explicitly saying it, a bit of a writing tutoring show for me and a lot of other people listening who want to write or write better. Is there anything else you're doing or employing that you think about or that's even conscious to you when it comes to saying stuff without saying it?
I think I've become more and more distrustful of language generally as I've written more. I think that's because I'm a nervous writer, and so I don't think of myself that way. I have that insecurity about it. But also it feels increasingly like it's more interesting and seemingly more truthful that the words are what we would like to be saying or like to be feeling or aspirational. And that's the use of them, right? That's what you're condensing some sort of vague emotion or something larger into this thing. And by the time it comes out, it's what you hope people hear. But then there's the character on the page. I have that. Writers don't have that necessarily. Novelists and short story writers and stuff, right? They have to imply it in other ways. But I have a picture. And so if someone says something and I have a picture next to it, it's just more interesting to watch if the picture is doing something else. If it's a double beat or redundant, then why are you drawing it? But also, I think kids relate a lot to saying one thing and thinking another or feeling another. I think everybody does, but kids do too. Everyone, I do get in trouble sometimes for implying that kids lie or for showing people lying or something like that. And it's like, kids lie all day. They're fascinated by lying. They can't believe they can say one thing.
They lie more than not.
Yeah, it's like one of the first discoveries you have, right? You're like, if I say I didn't do this, like, does that work? And like, well, sometimes it does. And they can't believe it. It's like their first, to adults even, they get to fool us sometimes. And of course you do that all the time as soon as the first time it worked. And you feel bad, but you also got away with the thing, that crazy discovery, right? And doing it in subtle ways too, where it's not an overt lie, but you're shaping what you'd like to be heard. All of that nuance, I think, is so much fun, especially next to a very simple character, using simple language. If you do it with language that a first grader is comfortable reading, with a character that's pretty simple, but it has that complexity in it. I really love that mixture of like, well, he's not quite lying, but why did he say that? But we've read 4 syllables and it's a turtle. And I just love the mixture of all that stuff. I really like how you can do that with very few elements, actually. It's really fun.
And I get to hear like part of the power of that is because you're thinking in these big evocative essay-like paragraphs, but what comes out is that distilled bit of wisdom. And on the lying thing, particularly, I'm also a father of boys. Not sure if I mentioned it or not. So I have an 11, 9, 7, and 5-year-old boy. And like, I don't know whether to like, I don't know where the line is on encouraging them to lie or like letting them get away with it. Like this morning, my 7-year-old is leaving the house. I'm like, did you brush your teeth? Yeah. And I did the sort of opposite of what I'm saying I should have done. And I'm like, oh, really? When did you brush your teeth? Just now. Oh, okay. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Was it just now? Because the toothbrush is already dry. And he's just like, looks at me like, oh, you really going to check my toothbrush? And then they figure out that they could just wet the toothbrush. Yeah,
well, that's the great thing too, right?
Your breath, right? But why am I doing this?
They're offended that you would think they had lied. They were like, "Oh yeah, that's how little you trust me." It's like, well, yeah, you just lied to me.
And I feel like I'm bad about doing this because then I'm like, I kind of want him to get away with this a little bit. You know what I mean? I want him to be able to see the malleability.
Yeah, what I like about talking to kids about it.
Can't trust
anything.
We
don't talk about like morals with it. When I do like a class visit or something, like we talk about drawing sometimes. I do an exercise with them where it's a turtle, actually, and I draw a turtle for them, and then I keep the pupils in the drawing on a separate layer, so they're movable. And then it's just a turtle. I like turtles because they can't express themselves physically. They're stuck in it's just a shell with like sticks out of it, right? And so you don't know how the turtle's feeling based on his body language. There's no way to know except his eyes. And so you say, how do we make this turtle look like he just did something terrible and is lying about it? How do you draw a lying turtle? And then I kind of go to say, well, when you lie, like, and you put it that way, like when you lied this morning, when you lied 10 minutes ago, notice the next time you lie, and you don't discuss like because you're a terrible person or because this is the wrong thing to do and you haven't figured it out or anything. You just say it matter-of-factly. When you lie, it's hard to make eye contact with the person you're lying to. It's hard. You feel bad, or at least you think you're nervous you're going to get found out, one of those things. And so you look away. And so watch what happens when we put this line. We ask the turtle if he's like stolen a bicycle. And if he looks down at the ground, what do we think? He looks like he's lying, right? And it's a very simple movement, but but that's the way you put it to kids. And you sometimes get flack for that, to be like, don't assume the kids are lying. It's like, I do assume the kids are lying. They're all lying all day. But you don't put a moral on top of that. You examine it as a phenomenon, things that we do. I don't know. I think that's the part where I get suspicion sometimes. Is just like, well, you haven't said what you think of that. And it's like, don't we all know? I think we can give them the benefit of the doubt that they know it's not correct. Doesn't mean they're going to stop doing it. But like, just to examine it as something that happens, something that we do. And where does that go then? When you're lied to, or when you do lie, like, let's follow that down. I don't have an ending in mind. Let's find out what happens.
I like your stance because telling people what to do never works anyway.
No, they smell it. They sniff it out. Then it just like, there's actually a great book to bring up in this context with Chekhov is George Saunders' book called Swim in the Pond in the Rain, which is a title brought from Gooseberries. And he examines a bunch of Russian short stories in that, including Gooseberries from this trilogy, and a couple other Chekhov ones too, I think. But he has another story, gosh, I forget now. It's a Tolstoy one. And he has a character make a huge change in it. Tolstoy does. But Saunders is examining the story and he says, now, how does he do this? We've known this guy to be one way the whole time, and he's about to have a change of heart. How does he pull this off believably and make it not sound like propaganda? And I love that term for this. And I think you can apply it to a lot of children's books too, is that like they can sniff out propaganda for like good behavior. That is a good word for it. It sounds a little harsh, and we've had this, term for that for other things that are called that. But they can smell propaganda. They're like, I don't believe it. So this is trying to tell me something and not earning it. And I smell a rat. And they can smell it right away. If you have a message in mind going in, it's going to be propaganda for the message, even if you do feel it in certain pages. And watch it. Don't make propaganda for kids.
Yeah, thanks for shouting out that book. George Saunders was our guest
Oh
in
man.
chapter 75 of the show. That was an incredible book.
Yeah.
That's actually the book I was interviewing him about at the time.
What a book.
What a book.
Yeah.
But now his new book, Vigil, which I don't know if you
Mhm.
have or you've read, but the reviews of it all are like George Saunders is back with moralism, to your point about avoiding moralism.
Right. I know.
Now he's returning with moralism.
Yeah. I think, well, he talks about this in that book, though, too. He talks about how you can have, and I related this to Chekhov really strongly, where he says, like, you're not going to write like the writers you love. You're going to begin maybe when you're starting, because he has that story about Hemingway and how he just wanted to be Hemingway this whole first chapter of his writing career. And then as soon as he let go of that, he was able to be himself. But at first, you have these guys in your head that you want to be so badly because you admire the work so much. And I badly wanted to write like Chekhov. That's all I've ever wanted to do. And I don't write like him, it turns out. I'm a little bit brattier, I think, than Chekhov was. I have like, I'm precocious, and he's not at all precocious. And it took me a long time to come around to that. But that book was really clarifying for that reason, to be like, oh. And also because I'd heard from Mac, actually, I'd tell this story because it's kind of flattering in a sideways way, is that when I was getting to know Mac, the guy I make books with sometimes, he has a big old library. And we were looking at Dead Souls, the Gogol book, another Russian guy. And I read a lot of Gogol's short stories, but never Dead Souls, never the long one. He goes, you should read that. And I said, I don't think I even like Gogol. I think he kind of annoys me a little bit. He's just too meta, or something's going on with like his writing. The nose just kind of lost me. He's up to too much in that one. He's too clever by half, I feel like. And he's like, that's really weird because you're basically like Gogol. Like you, like so much about your writing and what you're interested in reminds me of Gogol. And I was like, oh, that's awful. Like, that's too bad. I'd never thought of that. And then I read Saunders' analysis of Gogol and that story. The nose is in that Saunders book. And everything he talks about, like when he breaks his head, I've never taken literature. I never had a teacher explain who these guys were to me like that. And I was like, oh, crap, he's right. Everything about Gogol's interest in language and, how it can be twisted and all of what he was, angry at, it seems exactly in line with, I just related to it so much. And it was like, yeah, you're not the writer necessarily that you'd like to be. You are like, you're something else completely. That book taught me that really clearly. He's a wonderful teacher. George Saunders is.
Yeah, he is. You're not necessarily the writer you want to be. And you're talking a little bit there about finding your voice, Saunders towards Hemingway, but then finding, I think he said he wrote like a silly little note to his wife, and then it had a nice response, and he was like, oh, that's the style I'm writing. Do you have advice when people ask you that sort of classic question of how do I find my voice?
I had a pretty clear illustration of that because my first book, I Want My Hat Back, was an exercise in like removal. There's a better word I'll remember later, but I had written I had the title and the cover for that book before I had anything else. I thought it was funny, this character not wearing a hat, and the title says, I Want My Hat Back. And I was writing a narration-driven story about a duck who had taken it but left the bear some clues. It wasn't going anywhere, and I'd hated it. And I kept trying at it. And I knew I had to write something. My agent had said, like, you should write your own. This works better if you write your own too. And so I wanted to try. And then I was actually reading Cormac McCarthy a lot. Then we'll get into him in a sec. But he writes often without quotation marks. And I had never read anybody who did that. People who speak don't necessarily have quotes around it, but it's beautiful on the page. It's graphically beautiful, and you're working when you're looking at it. It makes you work. And I thought it was great. And then I thought we could do that. I could do that with the books. Well, I think what's tripping me up is quotation marks and commas before the quotation marks, and said the bear and said the duck and all this stuff. And I hate writing all that. I think that deep down, I just didn't like myself as a narrator. What am I doing in my own book? Get me out of there. And so I thought, well, how would you know who's speaking though? And I thought, well, you could do it with colors. If the bear is black and then all the other animals are primary colors, that's how you'd know who's speaking. And then I wouldn't have to be in my own book at all. And stylistically, it got me off the hook because then it meant even if they speak weirdly or if the writing is bad, quote unquote, there's no narrator. It's just these animals who didn't know how to speak in the first place. We didn't know that foxes could talk. So if he speaks badly, that's kind of impressive still that he's speaking. And like all of this, the more I got out of my own book, as a narrator and stylistically, even by removing quotation marks or anything, then I could write. I just had to get out. And it was this removal of myself from it, that whatever was left was my style of it. It wasn't anything I was adding or thinking it needed. It was something was blocking it. And that's almost always been my answer, is that something's in the way. I don't feel like doing something, is really the bratty answer. It's like, I don't want to. And it's the clearer I get on what it is I don't want to do and just take it out, then I can work. But that's more often than not been how the voice was found, is that it's just left over from the things I just, for whatever reason, understood or not understood, I don't want to do.
Wow, that's great. The voice is what's left over when you take out everything you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, wow, that's a great line. When you take out everything you don't want to do. I gotta ask you just, well, I have so many questions, but we have so many books. Maybe we'll save this one for later. We'll move on. Since you hinted so nicely at Cormac McCarthy,
yeah,
why don't we use your perfectly set up boost?
Sure.
And jump right into Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy.
Dark.
By the way, I should say for listeners, I read and loved, so I hadn't heard of any of these three books. I mean, maybe heard of them, maybe heard of, maybe. Not. I mean, I heard of all three authors. I'd heard of all three authors. I hadn't heard of any of the three books. I read all three books, which I don't always do, but I always try to. Helps that they were all kind of skinny. And I loved all three. I loved all three books. I just wanted to clear my own relationship with them up front. So Cormac McCarthy writes this book called Outer Dark, published in 1968 by Random House. Of course, I have the newer Chip Kidd designed cover featuring a stark, atmospheric photograph of a darkening sky, heavy blue-gray storm clouds rolling across a fading yellow horizon. Across the bottom edge of the image, a thin black line of tree silhouette stretches across the landscape with the author's name, Cormac McCarthy, in a prominent serify, what do you think, stoic font across the top. You probably know that, the typeface. I don't.
Oh, I don't actually. Kid would know it probably, right? He used it.
yeah, exactly. And he did the same typeface for all the Cormac
He did
McCarthy.
The whole set. Yeah,
he did the whole set, right? And at the bottom it says Outer Dark in all caps across the actual land. And at the very bottom there is a Houston Chronicle blurb that says he is nothing less than our greatest living writer. Below his name in really small font, it says Pulitzer Prize-winning author of The Road. This book is like it's a soul-shaking book. I had to admittedly refer to the Wikipedia plot summary during the reading of the book about 5 times.
What's going on? Where are we? Yeah.
I was like, what's going on? And I also decry the publisher. Vintage, if you're listening, how dare you tell me a plot point that does not happen until page 100? I checked it. I folded it twice here because I was like shocked. No. They don't reveal until page 193 of this book, which is only 242 pages, a major plot point, which is told right on the back. Like they say it right in the back. So I won't say it. Because it's like 80% of the way through we find this out. And when I found this out, I went back to the back and I was like, what the heck?
Wait a minute.
It's basically a brother and a sister on two separate searching paths 100 years ago in some unknown southern U.S. Appalachian type of town. And you don't quite know what's happening, but the scenes are dramatic and tense, and the language, the dialogue, it just rips at you like almost nothing else. McCarthy was born 1933 in Rhode Island, died 2023 in Santa Fe. He wrote 12 novels and, of course, won the Pulitzer, National Book Award, National Book Critics Award, and a ton of other things. File this one, Dewey Decimal on 813.54 for American Literature in English from 1945 to 1999. Jon, please tell us about your relationship with Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy.
I'd read The Road first because it was everywhere. And I haven't read it since because it hit me so hard. And it was one of those things where it's like, well, I'm not sure I want to go through that again anytime soon. I just remember at the end just weeping on our front porch, like without even really understanding why at the end of that one, but then deciding to read everything the guy had ever written, right? Or as much as I could get a hold of. And I think that Outer Dark was like the third or fourth one I read, but I remember thinking it was actually a lot more entertaining in a way. It was like a fairy tale. It felt like a weird Appalachian fairy tale in the way it was, especially the beginning was so fairy tale-ish. And I think that I haven't read it again since. I've been meaning to, because I remember it being a bit of actually an easier read than some of the other ones, right? Where The Road was pretty accessible, but like Blood Meridian, I remember crawling through. And then the Border trilogy, another trilogy, was a big, hefty, pile of books. And then Setri was really hard for me. It was like a lot of description and stuff, which is beautiful, but I remember taking a while. And there's a few other ones. But
Well,
Outer Dark felt
this is interesting because at some point I want to get your McCarthy reading guide. Okay, so we'll get that later.
Well, it's been a minute since all of them.
But The Road first is both of us.
The Road was first, and I think that was probably for a lot of people. It just exploded, and you were like, "Who's this now?" And I wasn't especially well read, and so everyone knew about McCarthy already. No Country for Old Men, I think it already come out. Even I can't remember. Maybe not. But Outer Dark felt like the most fun in a weird way to me, even though it's so hard and the subject matter is really gruesome. It felt like it was a fun kind of setup. And I think that, again, structurally, we talked about like most of these books structurally, he does a thing without spoiling it too much where he toggles between a couple different threads. But one of the threads is so fantastical and so mythical and so, it's like a tornado that just kind of we cut to every now and then, just like tornadoing across the landscape. And then you get these two quieter ones that are like following each other in a quieter way. And then this tornado, again, for like 30 seconds to remind you that this thing is coming for the whole story. It's going to destroy, or it has intent to destroy everything. And it's just a brief cut to it. And there's something about that was really formative. I think that what I like in storytelling is permission. I like when, like, I want a book to feel a certain way, or to sound a certain way, or to not do certain things. But in order to get permission to do that, I just mean creatively. I don't mean like publisher-wise or not anything like that. I just mean to make it work creatively. I always feel like I need a counterbalance, some sort of permission. So people can speak very plainly and not have any visible emotion, but in order to get permission for that, someone has to die at the end of the book. Like, you have to pay that off. There has to have been something boiling up underneath, or someone can be talking about where he wants to stand in a field, and that's fun. But in order to get permission to do that, you have to have an unseen rock just falling somewhere above him. And is he going to get hit with it, depending on where he stands? The rock is the permission to have my guy standing in a field, wondering if he should stand there or there. I like the guy on the field, but my permission slips is always, that's how I kind of structure these things. And I thought that Outer Dark felt that way, where he wants to examine Appalachia, and he wants to examine these two characters and their differing relationships, and he wants to just hang out in this place. And this tornado thread that we are just reminded of every now and then, that's coming for all of it, almost felt like, I think it's a huge driving thing, but you could, I'd be curious to see how it reads even without that. But it's a permission slip. It's got this great pace to it, where you're like, it's got this underpinning tension that you're like, it's this amazing, beautiful thing. And it eventually does. You have to pay it off. And like, of course you do. It can't just be this thing that, happens to give you permission for these other two. Eventually these trains have to run into each other, and what's going to happen? But it was I think a lot of these things were like lessons about like, oh, this is how I like stories to be set up. This is how the setups I like. And I think you can steal from that pretty easily because your endings to those setups are going to be different than these authors. But in terms of how I want them to begin, what's a good start? Both of those stories have had amazing constructions and setups that way.
Yeah, what an incredible analysis. Permission. For the
I don't know if you would have. I'm not sure. These things have been analyzed to death. I'm sure Outer Dark has whole essays everywhere, and even what McCarthy would have said about it. But that was my fascination with it. Was like, look at this giant permission slip. Yeah,
I like that a lot. And the sort of the tornado story you're mentioning deals with three outlaws who we don't know who they are, where they're coming from, what they're doing,
or even what they are,
they are. Right? Yeah.
One
of them has no name. And every few chapters, we just get like a 1 or 2 page story of them. And then when they interact with our protagonists, it's like extremely memorable and vivid.
It's crazy as much as you've been toggling between all of these different factions of the story, when they finally meet, there's this horror of realizing that these three creatures, whatever they are did really exist. You almost thought they might have been a dream inside the book. At least I felt that way. It was that whole.
Oh,
You remember
yeah.
in Rear Window, in the Hitchcock movie, where the guy who they've been watching the whole time finally comes across the courtyard and comes into the room that they've been watching him from, and it's like this insane horror of the thing that you knew existed from a distance, and then suddenly it's in the room with you, and you almost can't believe it. It's almost too scary that he's in the room. And it felt like that. It felt like this thing that had been distant and moving, and you just get glimpses of it, suddenly was next to your people that you'd been hanging out with in a much more gentle way. And you couldn't, even though they've all been established as real, you can't believe they're together. It's crazy.
The amount of I haven't seen Rear Window. I haven't seen Rear Window. I haven't seen Rear Window. I'll say again, since I just fell over my own lips on that one. But I know exactly what you mean about, the person you're looking outside and suddenly coming inside.
Suddenly they're in there. Yeah, you can't believe the proximity, I guess.
Yeah, and it's also strikes me that like both you and McCarthy like have this ability to compress a vast amount of stuff you're thinking about and processing into like this distilled, concentrated form. I looked up McCarthy's writing routines. I was very curious about it.
Yeah.
There's differing accounts, but some accounts say, he got up at 6, and he didn't talk much about writing. In fact, he says talking about writing is, the antithesis of writing.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't do it. He kind of goes on the record saying that. But though he's famously private, it sounds like he got up at 6 a.m. every day. He worked on the same specific typewriter for 50 years.
Mm-hmm.
He liked the practice of typing on a typewriter,
Mm-hmm.
and only later in life apparently did he switch to a computer kind of reluctantly. And then he wrote all day. Like that was kind of the thing. He wrote till he was done writing for the day without any interruptions. And he famously didn't take meetings. He didn't do what we're doing right now, podcasts obviously, but he also didn't do anything else. And his life was pretty poorly known until afterwards. We can talk about that in a second. But what is your writing routine now?
It's very erratic. These books I don't even think of it as writing. It's something else. I guess it's writing. And I'm getting more interested in the writing as it goes on, I think. But I don't know how to rough things out with writing. I don't know how to outline writing or think about it that way. It feels much more like you find a sound and you're almost like holding on to a little wild animal for as long as you can before it finally escapes. That sounds way too dramatic. Like, it's like, I'm always, my best stuff, or at least the stuff I'm proudest of, is when it really did surprise me completely. Like I was like, that's what's going to happen? I did not know. And that's why I like beginnings so much, because if I have a good beginning, I feel confident enough to just let this thing take me wherever it's going. The worst stuff is when you thought like you just kind of built your way towards an ending that you wanted. But my favorite experiences with writing anyway have been like, didn't know that was what was going to happen. And so it feels like I get so impressed with writers who are able to step back from their work, especially in the middle of it, and analyze it and pop the hood and tweak it and stuff, because I don't feel like that at all. I feel like I have like a run, like a screaming tightrope walk run in me. And I get to the other side and I look back at, whatever's happened, and like maybe go in there and massage it a little bit. But the main pieces of it were done out of a sense of running down a hill or something. It's just this momentum of just don't fall. Just keep it like there's very little. I know at the end about what I could take to the next thing, for instance.
Screaming, running across a tightrope. What a great visual.
Yeah.
Also, I can feel that in your books. I feel that in your books. There's a sense of propulsion.
It's a sense of momentum and propulsion. And who knows, like, what unlocks it. It's usually omission. It's usually like you took a word out, or you took a way of writing something out that was blocking you. And suddenly you know at least how to run with it. You don't know where it's going, but you know how to run for a minute. And then
so when you get up and you take your kids to school or whatever, and you get into your studio or your garage that you're speaking in now, like what do you do? What's your sorry? I mean, but like, are you grabbing a pen and a piece of paper, or do you go to the computer? Or are you drawing? Are you looking at what you started yesterday and trying to see where it goes? Like, you must have a lot of scraps for everything finished.
Lots of scraps. I think that I give up too easy too. I'll try a few pages, and if I'm not feeling it, then I'll give up pretty quickly. Because again, you know, you don't want to get 5 feet out onto the tightrope and not have it. You run back home pretty fast. And so unless it happens, I'm pretty spoiled on the format too, because it's very short, right? These things don't have to. I relate much more when I hear about songwriters than I do about reading about novelists or something like that. That always sounds more familiar. I have this book called Songwriters on Songwriting, and it's just interviews with all these guys, mostly guys. I think there's like 100 people in the book, and it's all interviews with how they think this goes. How do you write a song? What happens? How do you think you should, or how does it happen for you? And there's this huge debate with almost all of them as to whether it hits you like lightning and you are just like this, you know, receiver, or whether you can sit in a hotel room for 10 years and craft it. And I think it seems to have happened both ways to a lot of them. And so there's no real knowing, but I think it, like that sounds more familiar, that it can, like, you get spoiled by picture books again because they are so short. I Want My Hat Back was like 15 minutes. And it's basically what it was. I think there was one edit because we needed to trim a page. And that was it. What's there was like standing at the laptop, literally, just like following it down to be like, someone lies. If it's going to be pictures and words together and we can see, and it's no narration, someone should lie. And then like 10 minutes later, well, I'd be pretty upset. Let's kill him. And like, just you're impulsive, you're not planning, you're not outlining. There's no bullet points next to the thing. You're just writing. And you get so spoiled by an experience like that when it works, because you're like, well, that's how long a book takes to write then. And it's not always. And so, but I think that happens with songwriting too, it seems like, where it's, you know, they're in a cab one day and some song comes to them and it's like the rest of their career is spent playing that song for everyone and they don't know where it happened.
Yeah. And if you don't call it writing, maybe we broaden the term to like creating or to making or
yeah, composing, I guess, because you're composing a page is the other thing. You're not just writing. It's not your experience. The final experience with what I'm writing is going to be next to a picture on a page somewhere. It's never going to be the text anywhere. And so that can happen too. You can write a text that you think is working great. And then you sit down to lay out the book itself, how it's going to relate to the illustrations, and something doesn't work. You think you have some clever trick, or you think it's going to be okay. And then you put it on the page and you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. Shoot, it breaks it. And you know right away that it's broken. And you thought you had this great text and you'd gone to bed the night before thinking you got it. And then you start to lay it out and the final product doesn't work. For whatever reason, it could just be like simple stuff, stage direction. He can't come in from the left or something like that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work. Something's not working and you thought you had it. And so there's this extra stage where it's like you could have a great text, you could love the sound or whatever it is. And it has this other secondary proof that doesn't work.
What's a good day to you? Like what do you call a good day?
I'm in the middle of a bunch of them right now because I'd finished some books and I don't owe anybody anything right now. And so I have 3 or 4 things that no one knows about that I get to hang out with for a while and figure out what they even are, if they're even anything. And those feel really special, those days where you haven't had to show, and I don't resent collaboration or anything. I really love working with people actually, but I've become more and more comfortable with this period where it's like no one's seen it yet. And you're just kind of spitballing. You're figuring out how the books are going to feel more than what they actually are. You're just like sort of crafting the mood of them, I guess, which is to me just as important as what they're going to do specifically is like, how do they feel? What's this book? Because so much of what we've talked about why you go back to books is how they feel, right? Especially, and kids were that way too, I think. The books that I went back to over and over again, I don't think it was the story. It was just, I want to sit in there again.
Yeah. Yeah, you aim for that emotional state. And then you mentioned the 4 coffees at the beginning of the conversation. McCarthy is famous for discussing alcohol. I have written sober, and I've also written with cannabis, and I've also written with, I'm just curious, like, because your stuff's so creative. Like, I asked this question of Daniels too, and they joked back to me and they were like, because, Everything Ever All at Once is such a spastic creative movie. And they were like, well, you're basically asking us what drugs we take. And I was like, well, like, tell me about your head state, mind state. How do you get to these creative places?
Oh, I think it's fear. Fear is probably my drug. Just fear of it not working or fear of failure. I don't have I just read a Leonard Cohen biography, and it turned out so much of those things were written on just out of his mind, right? Just like in 100-degree heat in Greece, with just on every drug he could find, and like I was like, what? That's how he wrote like some of this stuff that just feels so conscious and so considered and so careful, and he was just like out of his mind in the sunshine somewhere. It was crazy. I can't relate to that. I don't think that I guess I haven't tried all the harder stuff, so maybe something would unlock. But no, I think it's, I'm very nervous as a writer, and I think I've learned to count on that as like, thing that drives it. There's so much talk about, conquering your fears in creativity, but I think I don't know what I would be without them. And so, yeah, I think it's just being really, really oversensitive maybe is part of it too, where you're like, well, I wouldn't feel that. If he says if instead of and there, then how would I take that? How do I take that when it's said that way? Because kids are like that too. So much of like our interactions with our kids are constantly like, oh man, he was really listening to that. Like I shouldn't have tossed off that line so quickly. Like he felt that. And, remembering that. And I'm still that way. And so being like, yeah, if you do feel it, then that's real. Keep track of it. Those lines are important. Our word choices are important. Kids' books are so great for that. They're so great at letting you think that things are like small movements are important, because they're so distilled, right? They're so simple.
Yeah, and there is David Mitchell, author of Cloud Atlas, calls poets apex predators of the literary world, because if you have an incorrect word, you have a dead poem. This is somewhat similar to the work you do, which is like maybe 100 words in the book.
Yeah.
And if any word's wrong, the whole string fails, right?
Yes, that's exactly how it feels. That's right. And the fear of that, just at like the 1,000 feet high on the cliff face fear of that, I think is what drives my thing. And it's not unpleasant. I really enjoy it. It's making it sound like these days are spent in angst and like fretting and stuff, but they're not. When you figured it out too, when you know you're safe, when something is going well enough where you're like, okay, I think I got what I like. It's the best. It's so great. But I don't, I wish I had some sort of chemical thing that would help me out that way. But I think
it sounds like you've actively thought not to pursue that, which is probably a wise decision. Like, for example,
yeah, maybe. For example,
well, my example was we've been going through like ADHD kind of diagnostics with my eldest son, and through the process, it's become painfully aware. It's been obvious that like clearly I have this too, and I'm reading the books and I'm like, I obviously have this. Now the question I'm faced with right now is, should I pursue like a formal diagnosis, perhaps leading to medication, perhaps leading to, should I go down that route? Like maybe that'll make me feel better. On the same time, this undiagnosed ADHD Neil is kind of someone I've really liked for a while and has done pretty good in a lot of things. Yeah. Now the other thing is this stuff changes over time. So now at 46, maybe now's the time I really should look into that stuff because it's starting to become problematic, So that's just kind of, some examples there. That was my example of,
I think I've got a bit, I've got a bit more of a spoonful than that of that stuff too. And I think that I hate letting people down or disappointing them. And I think that drives a lot of my work as a host too, as an author. You feel like you want to pay off their attentions. Why are you reading my book? Why mine? Why do I get this time of yours? That's the fear of it, that you would have wasted their time, or that it wasn't enough, it wasn't worth their having spent time looking at it. And I think that I can tell, or at least I think I can tell, when you've crossed past the reasonable fear of that. Like there's being polite, and then there's being super afraid to let people down, and then there's being paralyzed by it, right? And I think that intellectually I can tell, well, now that's unreasonable. You should probably not be as worried about it. But there's a certain amount of it, like you say, that's useful. It makes you a good storyteller. You're being conscientious of how your audience is feeling. Your sensitivity to that is your tool. But yeah, it's also very strange to be a semi-public figure that way, though, too, right? You spend all this time introspectively in your garage drawing turtles, and then they think that also makes you a good podcast guest or like a good person on stage. And like, why is that? Why? When it's almost the opposite.
You are a great
skill.
podcast guest. You're extremely affable, literary, considerate.
I wasn't
your
fishing, but you know what I mean. Where
your metaphors
I was
are
shocked
awesome,
to
though.
find that.
I love host.
Yeah.
I love author as host. I've never heard that before. That's such a great metaphor.
Oh, I feel that's most of the feeling I have is like you are, you've you're a host to your audience. And it doesn't mean that they know what's coming or anything, but you are your job is taking care of what you've even built them up to yourself. What's that great Hitchcock line? Something like, you've built your audience into a state. And if you don't satisfy that, they're going to become very angry. And like, yeah, that's your fault. You set up a problem, work it out. But all of that, they're here for that. They've come to your book or whatever it is you've made for an experience.
The public figure thing's interesting because, of course, McCarthy was famously private. And in 2024, 1 year after he died, a big Vanity Fair article came out featuring a long profile revealing how at age 42, McCarthy met and befriended a 16-year-old girl who became his secret muse for decades. It kind of reminds me a bit of that sort of Alice Munro post-death reveal of that she was aware of her daughter's abuse from her second husband. And I'm like, this is the era of the reveal, like with the Epstein files, of course. Every day there's like a new thing. And it's almost like first Peter Attia gets called out for, using vulgar language in an email to Epstein. And now the follow-up article is like, entire longevity science questioned, right? So I just wonder how you thought about parsing art from artist, if that's something think about, if that simply adds to your fear. I don't know. Like you're public.
No, I don't know. I think that this is going to sound like I believe in separating art from artist, and I'm not sure that's quite where it lands. It's so nuanced and so particular and specific to the situations, right? Like, I don't think you can have a rule about this. Every time you think you've got a maxim for it, you're like, what about that guy? You're like, oh no, well, that guy. Or that doesn't apply to that guy, obviously. And so you're always finding exceptions to those things when I don't think we can make a blanket rule about it. I think that working on stuff for kids, you're often in the business of remembering your own experiences as a kid, reading or watching or experiencing something that was made, right? And those experiences were mine. They're very important to me. And often I go back to books that I loved, and they weren't. I was putting things into them that weren't even there. I go back now, I'm like, this was the book. This was the one I read 50, like, this is boring. Or like, there's not even a story here. What was I doing returning to this? Or like, it wasn't nearly as well done as I thought, or something was up. And it's so mysterious why you get attached to things. I don't think it's any of our business why we get attached to a lot of things. We just do. But they're ours, though. Whatever it is that you're returning to is completely yours. And it helps me as a creator to think that then too, because if I'm trying to hold responsibility, either good or bad, for what a child takes from what I'm doing, it's impossible. It's too much, even if it's all good, even if they all love it. You can't hold it. And so giving that over to them to be like, it's yours. It's not mine anymore. And that's such a pat thing to say, right? It's so stereotypical of being like, well, it's not mine. I gave it out to the world. That's not quite it. It's like those things, whatever you're bringing to the books and whatever it is that's itching, those moments on your bed with the book were yours. And I would defend that. I would defend my ownership of those things, of those experiences. And kind of the work is doing that, is being like, well, what do I make now that I've had those things and those experiences? I feel a fierce defense of those moments. And that seems like, again, like it points to separating art from artist, that it doesn't matter what kind of weird life McCarthy had or what happened. And it does matter. I think it does. Obviously it matters, but it's a strange thing to equate it to making things for kids too, right? Because I think there's a lot of people who've had some really strange and sometimes not great lives who've made beautiful work for kids, and you feel especially defensive of children then. You'd be like, well, if he did that, then should his work be led into a room with kids? I don't know. It's impossible to answer, I guess. There's all sorts of exceptions, and again, making a rule for it seems dangerous. Yeah. But I do know that I think that I however it fits in, I feel very defensive of my own experiences with this work. And they feel like mine. Those moments feel like mine. And so that seems important to
Mm-hmm.
say without necessarily following it all the way down and still making room for, all the variations.
Yeah, that's a really great delineation, though, which is
Slipping out of answering the question here.
No, my experience with this work is uniquely mine. And the other thing I think I somewhat picked up, or at least it's a belief I have, is that how can you morally evaluate anyone? I mean, it's just like
Yeah.
John Lennon, has all kinds of massive personality defects that are pretty well known. Everyone still listens to the Beatles. Like, it's really hard to pull those apart and judge people separate from the work. I know, but I just asked because it's kind of like interesting that, like, famous person dies, and then in that date plus X, shocking revelation comes out. It's like that. We're getting that with all these people.
Well, it's also
now.
like with McCarthy in particular, all that stuff that they found out. Like, if you'd read his books, you're like, how shocked are we really? Like, he had to, like, what kind of mind makes this up? Like, what, you know what I mean?
It's
like,
dark
how do you,
stuff, really dark.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that, yeah, I don't know. I think that I am, of course, because he was so reclusive and so mysterious that you were hungry for any bit of detail. There's a funny detail about him that we learned not too long ago. Mac Barnett and I like to talk about clothes. We have very different tastes in men's clothes, but we like to talk about it and encourage each other in our various journeys sartorially. And he sent me a picture the other day of a beautiful, like, coat rack with like 6 blazers hanging on it, and like tweed ones. And he's like, who do you think that belongs to? And I was like, I don't know. Who are you talking about? And he goes, it's an author. Try and guess whose jackets those were. And I was like, I've got no idea. Like, what do we, Fitzgerald, I have no idea. They were nice. I could tell they were at least nice. And he goes, that's McCarthy. And I was like, really? Like, he goes, those are all McCarthy's blazers. I was like, that's so cool that he, like, after all that time, like, whittled it down to, like, this great little collection of jackets. And then Max says, no, that's not the case. What we're seeing here is like 6 or 7 of his favorites. He apparently had an entire warehouse. He was obsessed, and he collected blazers his whole life. He collected them, and he was insatiable. And it was such a crazy roller coaster ride to think, oh yeah, this fits with this stoic man I've read so much about, right? This, like, monk. Of course, he only has like 3 jackets, and this is probably all he wears his whole life. And I spent 5 minutes with that, and then to be flipped again, to be like, no, he was voracious and completely indecisive, and like never, and like, you go through that, and you settle so quickly into your picture of a person that you just don't know, right? And so you're just like, that was going to be real for me, that 4 jacket McCarthy. And now the much more interesting and complicated warehouse jacket McCarthy is the truth, apparently. And like, I was like, I remember even being like, hold on to that experience too, because we're so quick to then settle into what we hear. And it doesn't mean it's all good, and we should, make room for bad behavior and bad decisions and things, but also like how quickly we settle into whatever it is we've decided fits what we know of these people that we'll never know. Of course we won't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What a great little story. And it also it also makes me think, I don't know how, it's cool how he got a picture of that.
It was in some magazine. Someone
just
had
drove it around his closet. Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought he was like
No. It was like in some feature someone had gone to, because he I think he worked at the Santa Fe Institute the latter part of his life, the Physics Institute, and he just liked it over there. And so he had like a little apartment or something in there that's where it was, I think.
So this also makes me think about obsession in general as a thing that we like, we fawn upon when we see it producing great art that we love, and then you sort of see the sort of like side part that's like squirted out. I mean, I love Jerry Seinfeld. I've watched Seinfeld since I was a kid. When we were kids, that was the most popular show. And then when you find out later that, like, he owns 100 Porsches, you know what I mean? You're like, what? Like, that guy?
How does that? Yeah.
How does that square? But of course, it's like, he's got no other major vices, so he's got a lot of money, so he buys cars. It's like that big a deal.
Or even if he did, I mean, what would, and then how would that change if it turned out that we found out there was another couple major vices? How would that square with your justification of the warehouse of Porsches? Like, we're constantly reacting and adjusting and trying to make like an understandable theory on people that sort of holds, like a mathematical theorem on a person, where it's like, well, now we know that if we ever had, I mean, we're not like that. I think that we're masses of we're and one of the reasons that it's so much fun to write for kids especially is that they understand, or at least are comfortable with, contradiction, massive contradiction, and adults are less and less comfortable with it. They need a unified theory of people, and once they figured that out, very hard to break it on people. And so, but kids, they're not threatened by contradiction because that's not how they're working yet. They don't have a theory of themselves, certainly. And so contradictions in stories and in conclusions to stories or in people are just, that's okay to leave it there. And it's wonderful to create stories that's where you leave it. You leave it at a contradiction. It doesn't happen often, but yeah.
We're all full of contradictions. We've been talking a lot about the virtue and nature and fun of writing books for kids, yet we have not talked about a children's book author yet until now, the third and final. I mean, I was expecting when I got your books, I was like, is it going to be 3 picture books? Like, I was curious what you're going to send me. No.
Yeah.
But the third and final book, which is, you said, I think you read most recently, is Dominic by William Steig. I think I pronounced that right. Styg.
I've heard both, and I can't remember.
Steig?
I say Steig, I think, first, but then I'm always corrected. Sound off in the comments, I guess. I can't remember how it goes.
Off in the comments. Dominic, Dominic, published in 1972 by Farrar, Straus, and Giroux. The cover is a bright blue, diamondy pattern. What do you call this? Is that like a paisley? What do we call that here?
That is the most recent one. The original cover was all yellow. And he hand drew it all, I think. If you find the older edition, it's all bright yellow, and he's walking past a tree. It's very spare. But it's that same drawing of the dog. It's just on an older cover.
You're talking about, of course, is the dog, Dominic, the dog who is wearing a blue coat, a red scarf, and, of course, a small top hat, walking on his hind legs, carrying a bundle tied to the pole in that old kind of vintage hobo fashion that we are used to seeing from history. I want to say the font on the top is sort of like this Princess Bride type of all caps. Serif font. It says William Steig in capital letters. What's this book about? Well, not much. Basically, Dominic, it's time for a change. That's the first line of the book. It's time for a change. So Dominic passes his collection of hats and his piccolo. That's all you need, obviously, and heads out, letting the world take him where it may. Steig, for those that don't know, was born in the Bronx in 1907, a socialist Polish Jewish immigrant, and lived 95 years all the way up to 2003. He is most famous for writing the book that turned into the movie Shrek, but also a number of other fabulous children's books like Brave Irene and Pizza Pizza. I'm sure that's one of your favorites as well as one of my favorites. Filed this book under 813.5 for American Literature and English. Jon, please tell us about your relationship with Dominic by William Steig.
I came to Steig, however we're supposed to say it.
Steig. We'll just say how it's spelled.
Yeah. I didn't have his books when I was a kid. I only found them pretty late into doing children's books at all. And he was one of the other ones. It was sort of like McCarthy, where it's like, well, now I have to read everything this guy ever wrote, or try and find it. He's an amazing
I like
writer.
that about you. The compulsive full discography.
I don't know why I do that. It's more. I'm not a completist in a lot of ways, but for some reason that's my rhythm with writing. Is that if I read something by someone, I'm just like, well, okay, grab the pile. I don't know why that is. Maybe I could take comfort in seeing the variation or seeing them grow or not grow or something. But for him, my favorite works of his are his longer ones. There's 3 that I know of: Dominic, Abel's Island, and The Real Thief, which is a little shorter than the other 2. These are sort of like the short novels, Dominic and Abel's Island are. And I can't remember which one I read first. I think I read Dominic first of all of them. And it's, again, the structure of it, I think. What he does at the end of this book, he does this in his picture books sometimes too. There is something about his stories. Dominic does it in a different way, but a lot of his picture books are like this, where there is some sort of fantastical premise with magic or some sort of coincidence, something crazy that isn't really explained and not quite believable, that kicks off the action. And then it leads to really relatable and very beautifully described, like, sincere grief or peril or just dark, sort of a dark spot for our main character. And then just at the precipice of total disaster, he reminds you that this all started with something kind of unbelievable and fantastical, and we should pull that card again to solve our problem in also an unbelievable way. But isn't that a relief? Because we said magic existed on page 2, why not have it solve this completely impossible problem on page 78? And now we're out, right? Isn't that nice? And there's something that he manages to do in that where he gets you to the bottom, and he describes it in a way that you've been there and you're truly distressed by. And then he says, but not here, not this time. Today in my book, it's going to end well. And there's almost an acknowledgement that it shouldn't end that way, and that we don't even almost believe it ends that way, but that he's not going to let it end any other way, not today. It's very merciful, his stuff is, because it acknowledges how bad it can get. And yet he's like, but maybe not today. Sometimes not. Every now and then not. And how about this is one of those times? I'm in charge. I'm writing it. So today not. And Dominic pulls that off in a really interesting way where you don't even really know. Like you said, the very first line is it was time for a change. But the entire book, almost repetitively, too repetitively, Dominic is ecstatically happy with his life. He's walking around. He's on sort of a walking tour, kind of a weird nomadic. Like he doesn't even know why. He's left his house on page 1, put a note on the door, and headed out for reasons that he's just a time for a change.
It's time for
everywhere
a change.
Everywhere he goes, he's rolling in the grass, literally. Can't believe how happy he is and how beautiful the world is. And only a writer like Steig could pull off those sentences even just over and over again, just describing the complete beauty of the world and how lucky Dominic feels to be alive. And it's almost monotonous. You're like, what is like, shouldn't this guy have a problem? Like, what are books, like, shouldn't books have characters with problems? And then at the end of the book, finally, in the last like 5 pages of the book, his problem is revealed to us that he didn't even know was his problem. The thing he was searching. I'd never seen a book do that, where it was like, you're going to go 98% of the way through this book without the problem being stated by either the character or the narrator. And at the very end, he's going to get something that he was wanting all along. It's an amazing trick. I couldn't believe it. It shouldn't work. So much of Steig's work shouldn't work, but he's just such a craftsman that it works. He's just a gorgeous writer. And I saw this. I don't usually get really sentimental about original art. In kids' books, you see a lot of original art and, ephemera and stuff like that. And I never really get much out of it. It's always like, I'm not romantic about that kind of thing. But at the Eric Carle Museum, they have an archive, and they had Dominic, and he wrote it with like a Bic pen in a 10-cent notebook. And you can tell he did it straight. He just wrote it. There's small notes here and there, but he was telling himself a story. And it just dropped me on my head. I couldn't believe it. Yeah. And I'd love to write that way. Again, he's one of those writers that I don't write like him. He's very descriptive and very comfortable and very verbose in his writing. And I'm the opposite almost. But like to write like that, though, to sit down and be like, let's tell myself a story. And maybe, you never know, right? Maybe in his head, he had this whole thing mapped out and he was just executing. But it feels to me like he was just writing this and wondering where it was going to go. And then he just landed this crazy jet.
Yeah, absolutely. What a great way to describe it. And you just revealed to me so much more than I noticed while reading the book. I mean, I'm like,
it's a strange structure. Structurally,
your description of it is like the magic to me. Well, yeah, it is a strange structure.
You don't know why you're reading it. Like, it's just this episodic weird, like, what is going on? The thing I'm talking about, that permission slip, isn't there. It's that thing that should justify all of this meandering and all of this pastoral wandering on the part of this dog. He doesn't have a permission slip for it dramatically. There's no tension. There's this gang that's following him around, but even that just feels like, episodic. And so, like, there's no propulsion. There's the word you propulsion. There's no propulsion in it. The only propulsion is this guy being like, I'm going to move on, and like that shouldn't work. And you shouldn't be able to introduce the main thing he's been pining for that he didn't even know in the second last page of the book. I also, in this one, without giving too much away, hopefully, in a lot of Steig's books, this happens too, where the character ought to die, really. They dramatically they almost feel like they do, and then something pulls them back right at the edge and says like, not today, magic, you know, psych, he's okay, he's fine, it's actually very beautiful right after that. But you almost feel like that last bit is almost too good to be true, and it's very powerful that it's almost too good to be true. It gives him license to be almost like heavenly in it, or like there's some sort of dreaminess in the last bit after the person should have died. And so you almost don't believe it. You're like, this is what I hope was going to happen, but I don't think this actually happened. And it's an amazing trick because, of course, the narrator, he never blinks. He never says, this didn't really happen. This is just, some sort of weird dream he had. But he does this in his picture book sometimes where he's like, yeah, it's, by all rights, it should have ended terribly. But, and so it's almost, it gives him license almost to be too sweet in the ending, because you don't quite think it's happening. I don't think. It's really interesting. He's a very interesting writer. I just love that book. I've read it a couple times now, and it's amazing.
It is amazing. And Abel's Island, also a gem.
Oh man, so good. Yeah, I love Abel's Island. Yeah.
I get a lot of emails. I'm sure you do too, for people asking, I've written a book, how do I publish it? But more than they get those, they come more for children's books than anything else. So I imagine you are just buried in those. I noticed Steig didn't actually become a children's author until he was 61 years old. Like that's how old he was when he wrote his first children's book. I was just curious, for those people listening who are interested in becoming a children's book author, what your current advice to them would be.
It's hard. It is a hard one. I think that usually if you're coming to it at a certain point in your life, you have a reverence for the form, right? You've this preciousness to it that you've realized or remembered or something, or you're like, well, I've had kids and we've been reading these books and I have an idea for one. I want to be part of this experience that I've been having. Or there's a bunch of weight on the thing that isn't anything to do with what it is you might be working on, your story itself, what the book might be. There's all this baggage you bring to it, either positive or negative, where you're like, well, this is the special time that I remember when I was a kid, or I just spent this time with my own kid. And there's almost like a strange feeling of that, because I felt so much in these books, or because I think they're so important, that almost gives me, the right to do this. And I think it's a really hard discussion when it doesn't go well. You're like, but I love children's books. I don't understand. Like, I don't get to make one. Like, I love them. It's a hard thing to do. And it happens with my stuff too. It's like, well, isn't this my job? What do you mean this one's not going to work?
Yeah.
But I think it
happens
reminds
with my stuff too. I should say I get more rejections than acceptances by a lot.
Yeah. Some stuff just doesn't work, and you can't, the form itself is not enough. Just because you love the form, and because you felt so much for it, and because your children loved it, or because your kid liked this, any of that, you're not owed it. What's that great line at the end of Unforgiven? That's like my favorite line at the Clint Eastwood movie, where he's about to shoot the sheriff in the head. And he says, deserves got nothing to do with it. And that's exactly right. The work has to work, like, locally, as much as you can, to focus on what's the book? What's the next page? Why am I turning the page? Get out of your head about how reverential you are to children's books and what a special time childhood is and all of that. It's only going to make you freeze up or make you make weird decisions, because this is this diamond time. And it is. Doesn't mean it's not. But like, why are you turning the page? Get as hyper local as you can to the thing to make sure it's working technically. That's what you owe them. That's what you owe the form. Not that you love it. Like, no one cares if you love it. Is it working? That's how you pay tribute to this. Like, make it run as well as you can. And that's how and then, you get to bring your head up later and then revere the whole thing again and be very respectful of it and childhood and magic and all of that. But in the moment, don't think of any of that stuff. It's just getting in your way, and it's going to make you angry if it doesn't work. It just makes you really upset when it turns out you don't get to make the book that you thought you were going to get to make. You just get bitter because you loved it. Shouldn't I get to do the thing I love? And it has to work. It's got to work. Kids don't care that you loved it. They don't care about you at all, which is the freedom of it. Once you start to do it, kids do not care. I don't think about who's making the thing. Does it work? Why am I turning the page? Yeah.
So say someone writes a book that they feel like it does work, and they say that right now is someone listening who has a gem, and you and I will both read it, and we agree it was a gem. Publisher would know it was a gem. Market would know it's a gem.
Yeah.
There is still that missing, what do I do with it thing, and what's your advice for that?
You mean like just like how to submit it or something?
Published? Yeah.
Oh, God.
What's your advice on how to get? Because you got found, and so did I. So my blog was popular, and the blog I wrote, 1000awesomethings.com, got popular. So then I got found. But what I'm usually hearing from is, how do I want to get found. Find me.
Yeah.
Here it is.
Yeah.
I want this to be discovered. And then
Those
I usually end up saying
all
like,
the time.
I can only govern my own advice, which is like have something viral online. You know what I mean? Like have some,
I slipped in just before that. And that's what makes my impressions and advice a little bit obsolete, is that like my job started pre-online. I had a website. It was old timey. It was Web 1.0 basically. And so I had a website and I had a student film, and I heard from an art director at Simon & Schuster who saw my student film on like YouTube 1.0. There was like 10 videos on it. And she said, do you want to make a children's book? Or do you want to, what she said was like, I think this would make a good book. She was an art director, and so she couldn't push it through herself, but she could help me submit it, or at least she thought it was worth trying. And I had not thought of books at all. They were not on my radar. I was in animation. I'd gone to school for animation. I was going to spend the rest of my life in animation. And so the only book I could remember or think of was Sam and the Firefly. And I went to the bookstore and bought it and brought it home and thought, okay, this is a children's book. This is 90 pages long or whatever it was. So I gave her a 90-page dummy of my student film. And she said, this is ridiculous. Children's books are 30 pages. So I don't think it's going to work, but I'll keep you in mind. And then 3 years later, she wrote with a text that someone else had written saying, you want to illustrate that? You could try that. And I did that. And that was my first book. And in the making of that one, that was Cat's Night Out by Carolyn Stetson. And it was with Simon & Schuster. And it was the art director was Lucy Cummins. Lucy Cummins is a children's author herself now, a very, very good and successful one. And she's still at Simon & Schuster in that capacity, in a better capacity, but she still makes these beautiful books. But in the course of making that, and not necessarily because of any particular page or anything, but I'd been working in story and design and animation, and something was wrong. Something was up. I wasn't fitting well. And there was something about my storytelling sensibility that I didn't know about, that it was emerging the more work I did. And I was like, something's up. I'm hitting a wall. And suddenly I did this book illustration, and I was like, oh no, I've been at the wrong thing the whole time. Here's this beautifully tailored format for everything I want to do and everything I don't want to do. And what was I doing the whole time? I should have been doing this. And so I got a book agent, and I had 2 years left on my DreamWorks contract as a designer there. And I told the book agent that, and I said, at the end of 2 years, can we get enough work going where I might be able to, not renew my DreamWorks contract? And that's what happened. And that was like 20 years ago.
Wow. What a real story. And it does also remind me that like
it's so useless to anyone looking to get found, though, isn't it? Like, what a great little ramp.
It isn't though, because what you did do was put a lot of stuff out there. And when you saw it on YouTube or something, there's something that you say old-timey website, you were putting your work, it's like Austin Kleon's old adage, like show your work.
Show the work,
keep showing your work. A Sloan, Canadian band, used to always say.
Good old Sloan,
Good old Sloan. They used to always say, like, just keep playing. If it's good, you'll get noticed, like just kind of keep putting yourself out there.
I will say too, like that first book, I Want My Hat Back, we sent that out to a bunch of places because I didn't have a publisher yet. And only one of them wanted to make the book as it was. You only need one. I think that there's a temptation when you're starting, before you know editors and art directors in particular, to think of it as a monolith, that publishing doesn't want my book, or that editors don't want my book or something. But they're not that way. These are very distinct personalities working at these houses and at these places, and they all have different tastes, and that's why they're there. And they've been hired for that peculiarity in their taste. And so you only need one. You don't need all of them to like your book. You just need one.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
And you can go through 9 before you find your one. You only need one. And so I think that's important to remember, is that, from the outside, it just looks like this giant building and they're all working in there, and you just get this rejection letter that pops out of the building. But you don't. You get a rejection letter from one of them, and they have their own taste, and they were in a certain mood that day, and they've been publishing certain kinds of books for the last 5 years. Whatever it is, whatever the context is, it's unknowable. But you just need one to be like, I think we could try this out. And that's all I had was just like, I didn't hear from 10 art directors. I heard from one at the beginning, thinking like, oh, this could work. And it's a lucky bounce. I know that it is. And so that makes maxims and advice and sort of wisdom only so useful, because it's been a long time. It was in a different time for all of this. I remember being horrified when I heard that publishers were looking at like Instagram following numbers and stuff. Like, holy cow, how would I have done it back then? I don't think I would have. I don't know if that would have happened. I didn't have anything like that, and I'm not great at that side of it. And so, yeah, I don't know. It's only so useful. I do think it was also.
But I don't know. I think they're also what they're looking for and how they're looking for it always changes, because what everybody follow, like now, if you look at Instagram numbers, you get this homogenous, like algorithmically derived viral stuff that isn't necessarily going to sell books. So
no,
they might be off of that train already. You know, you know what I mean?
I do think it's worth it. What I'd heard later about some of the work, not from the art director initially or anybody else, but I do think it helped, is that I was getting interested. The stuff I was putting on a website for reasons I didn't understand was that I was starting to draw letters and write sentences underneath the drawings. I'd always liked that. I'd always liked captioning my drawings with a funny line that switched what you were thinking of. And I think as an illustrator, if you want to make it look like books, make it look like a book. Put words next to the thing. It'd be surprised how much of a difference that makes. We're like, how come no one wants me to illustrate books? I would love to. And you're like, well, as soon as you put words next to the exact same illustration you just got rejected on, they'll be like, oh yeah, well now it looks like a book. And like, it just coming to them that extra bit. Again, being a good host to be like, I'd just be very, very, very clear and go as far down the line of making it look like an actual book. Don't count on them to picture anything you haven't shown them. Make a cover. Do a title on top of it. Think of the book as an object almost from the start. It is an object. It's never not going to, like, the final product will be an object. So think of it that way. What's the cover? What's the back cover? What's the title page? What's the chapter 1 title? All of that stuff that gets people thinking that they're reading a book. All that is important, I think, into having them picture it being a book. It helps them, and it doesn't mean it's going to stay that way, but it helps them. Now I can pop the hood on this and we can craft it together, or it's done. Who knows? But thinking of it as a book from the start and not anything else, not a manuscript, not a rough, not a sketch. It's a book. What is it? Yeah.
I love that. And there's a lot of pieces there, and you know, it's how much do you push on the selling of it side versus on the craft side. Also, this is kind of my last question before we get into fast money round. We'll kind of tail things off here, but I have one last question. It's kind of around ambitions, kind of around how big you want to be, or how big do you want your life to be? Because I was looking at Steig. He had a massive life. 4 marriages back to back. Like every marriage that ends, his new marriage is the same year. You know, if you look at it.
He was a boxer for a while, I think, or a fighter.
Did you know he did 2,600 drawings for the New Yorker, including 117 covers. Plus,
and his early stuff looks nothing like his later stuff. His early stuff, he was trying to be like Charles Addams or something. It's washy and heavy, and it's gorgeous. He's so good at it. But then his later stuff is nervous and light and wispy and stuff. Like, he's completely changed throughout the course of his thing.
Yeah, it does change. Yeah. And he's got 40 children's books, 20 adult books. He lived a long life. You know, there's that old quote that one of the best ways to ensure a long life is to be a workaholic. What size of life do you want? You're a craftsman. It's obvious. You focus deeply on the craft and on story, and that's why your work is so good. And at the same time, you're in a world now where you have to probably think about how big you want to be and how ambitious you want to be. You've got kids. You probably have all these other tensions on your personhood. How do you think about that?
I think I'm in the middle of thinking about it consciously for the first time, maybe ever. Maybe that's just what happens in your 40s with kids and everything. Is you're like, okay, what's this? Now that can I take the wheel of this a little bit? Can we make it into a picture? Because you do meet people too who are around your own age who did, and they've made these days that look the way that they want them to. And it's a whole work of art of its own, right? How your days are paced, and it makes a huge difference. I think I felt out of control of that for a long time. I don't think that I felt that it was something I could steer. I was more reactive. So much of my work is reactive. So much of I don't like making things from scratch. I like reacting and seeing the best I can do with something that's given to me. And so I think I thought that my life and my days were going to be like that too. But little by little, you're like, wait a minute, maybe I can, if I don't like something, can I change it a little bit? And that's just now, like, coming up. We're like taking that control. Because some people, I think, were born with the comfort of doing that, but I wasn't. And so it's new, that idea that you can make your days look like something that you thought of. I don't know. It's pretty good right now. It's not bad. I think that for a long time I was used to moving every 3 or 4 years for the work. I would go to, I was on Coraline, like you said, up in Portland, Oregon for a couple of years, and down here for a couple of years. Well, it's been a long time now, but I would move around a little bit for the work, and I liked the rhythm of that. And I kind of miss just the uprooting and seeing what the life looks like that you would make in a new place. I miss home very much. I miss Toronto. I think my days in Toronto would be fun too. So I don't know. I think and the work doesn't need to come from anywhere. No one cares where you hand these books in from to a certain extent. And so you don't need to be anywhere. But that almost freezes you up more. If no one's telling you to move, 20 years go by and you haven't. If you like your desk and you like your work, you look up and you haven't moved. And so I think that all of that's at once. I don't know. I don't think I'm very ambitious on the size of the work. I really love books for that they can be small but still get a ton of exposure if it goes well, right? Like you can make this small thing in your garage, and if it goes well, it's in 30 countries and all of that. That combination is really exciting. I think I thought I liked the reverse, or at least the bigger one. When I was working at the bigger studios, I thought, this is great. We're working on these things together that are going into all these different countries, and they blanket the culture for a while, and isn't that exciting? But this combination is, I think, more suited to my sensibilities, is that it's something small, but if you do it right, it can zip around anyway. It's a nice combo. And even when I think of film and TV and all those other things that it could happen, I always want the smallest version of it. I don't, the adaptations of my stuff, what would be appropriate, is always pretty small and janky, and that's the way that it ought to be. And so even, like, it's almost harder to get that stuff made, right? Who wants to make a 7-minute adaptation that's kind of, really strained and nervous? I don't know. Those adaptations that would be correct to the books are really unmarketable. I haven't made any characters, really, if you think about it. None of my characters have names. They're not commercial. And I think if I was more ambitious, I would have leaned more into that side of it. And so, again, we're full of contradictions. I love mass communication, and I like when these things go everywhere, but I almost kind of resist what I know would probably be more commercial in some certain ways.
And you still on your Instagram sell throw pillows that are made by your mom. With your unnamed characters on it.
Yeah, unnamed characters. I refuse to. Yeah,
sold out. I noticed.
What? Yeah. Well, there was only like 7 of them, but yeah, it's true. Yeah, you can say sold out even if you only make 4. It turns out we figured
that's
that
right.
out. But, yeah, but shout out to those felt pieces though too. But but that's another thing. Is like we have a lot of discussions. Mac and I do, and I increasingly do too. With as you travel around, and people our age now have businesses that have had a couple decades to grow or whatever it is, you run into people who either run bookstores, or even like we do events sometimes at clothing stores like we talk about, or other guys, like people who have started their own work, who are into their own work. And the people that I relate to the most, and I think Mac feels the same way, are people who have consciously limited their growth to a certain size where they know they are happy. I think that maybe that's a generational thing where we all watched, our parents in the 80s just like unlimited to the moon growth, and it just killed everybody. But I think there's an understanding, or at least I relate to an understanding, where you're like, I'm happiest if I stop here. I can work here. It doesn't need to get bigger. This is perfect, actually, and I make my best work here. It's people who have decided to do that be like, well, if we go any bigger, the work's going to suffer. We know it will. We might get richer, but we're going to make stuff we don't like as much. And that seems like such a simplistic thing to say, but it's like it's not. It's very rare that people know when to stop, right? And be like, this is perfect right now. This amount of work, the size of the work, this is just right. I can make exactly what I want, and I haven't given anything up any bigger, and it begins to cost me in different ways. And right now I have control over my days. I have control over my product, for lack of a better term for it. And like, it's pretty rare. And if it doesn't need, these things are always dynamic. The book industry is dynamic. Where we're going is like, all of this, the markets are dynamic. The world is dynamic. And so who knows how long that particular arrangement will hold. But I don't have ambitions of growth for the sake of it. I never have. Stability is the goal, I think, but that's a different thing than growth.
Stability is the goal, and happiness as the output of controlling your days and controlling your work and your art.
Oh, look at us with the maxims and big sentences. I didn't think we made those as much.
I collect quotes. I feature them. I'm writing stuff the whole time we're talking. You are a wordsmith, and it's really beautiful listening to you. Can we do some fast money questions to close us off?
Let's do it.
I mean, we can. It's obvious that we could open up a lot of these conversations, because they all got to a good deep level, and then we could rappel down any of these holes for kind of forever. But there's a lot there. There's a lot in how you think about your art, your craft, your work. There's a lot there for writers, for readers. It's really, really beautiful, and I really appreciate your time. So fast money questions. Here we go. Hardcover, paperback, audio, or e?
I like a paperback. I love a paperback.
And you make me realize, of course, I didn't put board in there, which maybe I should have.
We're talking about books that we read, right?
Yeah, your preferred format for like holding and carrying, and they
get shoved into things so often that I like a paperback.
Yeah. They get shoved into things so often. Okay, that's a good reason for it. How do you organize your books on your bookshelf?
Tone, or like not tone, that's the wrong word. Vaguely like subject matter. Like I have a whole section for like folk tales, but that's merged with poetry for some reason. And then there's art books, but that's mixed with photo books and things. Like there's an outsider art section. So it's pretty organized, I guess. But then above that, that's the main shelf. Then there's two shelves above it in the main room, and all bets are off up there. There's like fiction and mixed with like books on physics and stuff. It's like I know where everything is. It's that classic thing, right? Where I can find you the book right away, usually. Yeah. But that, good luck. Outside the bottom shelf that I know is right in someone's eye line that you'd like to show people and people look at if they come in the house. Above that is just like, these are my books.
I love your kind of vlog Substack that you have in addition to the shared one with Mac.
Oh, and, my own weird one. Yeah.
I feel like I'm craving of a vlog about your bookshelf.
It's very reactive.
What's your reading life? What's your reading like? Where do you put reading into your days, and how? And because the biggest question we get from people listening is how do you make time to read?
I go through moods, I guess, where it depends on the book. It's a hard thing to because we get a lot of questions for kids about how do you get kids to read, and or isn't reading worthwhile? And it is, but they're only going to read what the book if they like the book, right? And so I don't think if the evidence is to be believed, I don't think I believe in reading as an activity to be done all the time, because I don't read all the time. But if I do find a book I love, it's hard to do anything else for a while. Like it's that way. And then you come out of it, and then you don't read for a long time. I go through long spells where I don't read, and then I forget how good reading is and start to read another book again and think like, what was I doing? Let's read 5 books, and then I do. And then you get out of that again. So I wish I had a more regular reading schedule. I think I get through a lot more books that way, because I'm not really broadly read. I have favorites I go back to. I'm like, what am I doing going back to a book? I haven't read anything. Go read something new. It's very erratic. There's no system to it.
Which is maybe what is achieving peak discoverability or something like that.
Yeah, I think that's right.
On the finding a book that you like, do you have a favorite bookstore, living or dead?
Oh no, I should have prepared for that.
Or a library, or you have a place that you have a nice connection to when you're looking for a book.
I mean, I love shout out to Type on Queen Street in Toronto.
That's probably what I would say. That exact store.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great. I wish they were my local, because I don't live there. But if I did, they would be. I remember, was it called Pages on Queen Street?
Yes.
Remember it was. Pages?
Yes, I do.
I found, after a show in Toronto, because I went to college in Oakville, and so we take the train in and we go see a show and get some food, and then they were open pretty late, right? And so you go in there, and they always had gorgeous art books. I never could afford any of them. You couldn't buy them, but you'd flip through them, and I found more stuff in there. I remember finding David Lynch's paintings in a book there, and I'd never seen his paintings before. It was like right before they closed, I think. I found that and been like, what a great store. Who else would carry? I mean,
Also, shout out to the late night bookstore. I mean, it's a dying breed.
I know.
We have a couple
our
of them.
local here is called Skylight, and they're open till 10, and it's perfect, right? Because we have babysitter, and the kids won't be asleep till 9:30 on babysitter nights at least. And so we finish dinner by 9, and we're like, what do? And we go to Skylight, and you buy a book that you didn't know about before. And yeah, exactly. Late night bookshops.
Special thing.
But yeah.
I feel bad asking this because you've shared like 20 large dollops of advice already, but my typical last question is, do you have a final piece of hard-fought wisdom for those out there who are on their own journey around largely, this is the only show in the world by and for book lovers, writers, makers, sellers, and librarians, so that's our audience. Any hard-fought piece of wisdom that you want to share that you've learned over the years?
I mean, we talked about being reactive before, and as far as making things, but just generally to be aware that you are largely reacting to things instead of in the business of making new ones. Don't worry about that. That it's that the life is made of and the work is made of a series of choices between things, not something that you're responsible for completely, and that you are found in those in the aggregate of those reactions in your choices. And there's a truth underneath all of it that probably again isn't any of your business, but it's not just you. It's never just you. And so, like, what, man, there was this crazy letter that someone published of Steve Jobs right before he died, where he goes on and on about, like, I don't make my clothes. I didn't invent the mathematical theorems that I use every day. I don't know half of computing or whatever it was. It was all these things that he just admitted he was not responsible for. I don't grow my food. I don't do this or that or the other thing. I am part of the human race and I'm indebted to them, and that kind of thing, where it's like, there's something about that. There's something about understanding that you are part of a collective and part of history and moving through it, and you're indebted to all of it. There's this Wendell Berry essay on, this is going to be a little bit F, but it seems to fit, and it's a good last bit, where he wrote an essay on Amish people, and I come sort of from Mennonite stock, Winnipeg, Classens, all that, and so it was only one generation back from Low German and a lot of farmer sausage. And so I read this essay on Amish people, which had some overlap to it. And he talked to Amish people in Pennsylvania, and they said it's very strange being Amish in America because Americans are obsessed with finding themselves, and Amish people want to lose themselves. And it was like, that's it. That's the work. That's the whole thing. There is something. I'm not worried about finding myself. It's there. I don't need proof of that. But to lose yourself in the thing, to step back again, to get out of it, and to see what happens then was like that line really nailed me to the wall. Yeah.
That's a really beautiful quote. And
isn't that good? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
There's this quote on death that I'm going to have to email you afterwards with, because it's something about, like, when you get close to death, it's about feeling like you're part of the soil and the water and the dirt, and, you know.
He has another one. Wendell Berry has one on death, and he has, God, it's beautiful. He says something along the lines of, like, we miss the people that we love when they die, but after a while we realize that they have become part of the eternal world. It is we who are the absent ones. Something along those lines. I know, right? Like, yeah. He's good, man. Wendell Berry.
yeah.
He was all right.
Really good. He goes all like, you're good too, Jon. Really good. And your work is beautiful. On the shelf behind me, I've got your trilogy. I've got The Skull, which I loved, which is like, I'm surprised. I was surprised when that book came out, and it was at the front of Type. I think that's where I saw it. And I was like, whoa,
nice.
This is really different.
Type.
And you're prolific. You know, it's like not a season goes by when there isn't a new book from you. You are all class. It's got a huge mind behind it, a beautiful mind to listen to. I'm really so grateful for your time and your thoughts and energy. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for listening to me chat away. Thanks for the questions. This was an amazing prompt. Thanks so much for having me on. I was really excited. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jon. Hey everybody, it's just me, just Neil again, hanging out in my basement, listening back to the eloquent, wise, positively verbose. I mean verbose in a good way. Like the man is, what did he say? 4 cups of coffee, 5 cups of coffee, whatever number of cup of coffee. I could have done that much or more with this guy. Like he's just like oozing knowledge, intellectualism, information, a thoughtfulness and intentionality. I mean, he's writing kids' books. When you see the book, you're like, oh, some pictures, like 10 words. You don't realize like the vast, giant iceberg of a mind sitting underneath the whole thing. Do you? Maybe you do. Well, I mean, obviously you do, because he's just like, he just won the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award. Astrid Lindgren was the woman who wrote Pippi Longstocking, by the way, and the Astrid Lindgren Memorial Award is pretty much the biggest children's book award you can win globally. It comes with like $500,000 or something, like prize money for children's books. You got to fly around the world. You're going to Sweden. You're accepting, these giant metal things. He won. He's the winner. He hadn't won it when we recorded this conversation, but he won it like a week later or something. And then I went down to LA and I hung out with Jon. It was like in person after we'd done this podcast. I was staying in this hotel in Long Beach. He's like, I'll come over. He comes over. We go for dinner. We walk. We talk. It was like the podcast part 2. I wish I had recorded that as well, but it was now after he'd won this award. And I could see he was still, as I think anybody would, still also like processing that, And we discovered we had a lot of overlaps. One of them being Dan Kwan. He worked with Dan Kwan. Daniels, chapter 101. Anyway, so much to say about Jon Klassen. Lots of quotes jump out. I usually try to do 3. Maybe I'll do 6 this time. Like, how about this quote? Early in the chat. Toronto goes through weather together. LA doesn't go through weather together. There's nothing that bonds us together in some way. I thought that was so fascinating. When you go to Frosh Week at university or college, they try to give you everyone's got to jump in the lake together. Everyone's got to chug 20 beers together or some stupid stuff. But the collective battling that we face when you go in the lake or when you dig out from a snowstorm, it's worth something. It connects you as a community. And he said that's why the pandemic was so profound in LA, because it was one of the very few times it was collective adhesion, sticking togetherness. I'm going to use adhesion. Reminds me of tape. How about this one? I think it's hard to fit that into your brain. And I think I've also seen that it can affect the world if you try and swallow all of it, if you try and internalize it, because you think you ought to, because it's very rare, because you should pay the scale tribute, because the work requires quiet and weird moods. I do think it means I get to do weirder stuff that I would normally be allowed to. There's a whole lot of stuff happening in that quote, right? We're talking about success. I talked to him about I had this huge, giant children's book, awesome as everywhere. It was on the bestseller list, and people told me they're like, it's one of the best-selling children's books of the year. And I remember it sold 35,000 copies. I was like, that's tiny. They're like, oh no, for a children's book, that's not tiny. Most children's books sell 500 copies. And I also know it's really the hardest industry to write because it's the thing that people want to do the most, because it's the thing that most people think that they can do the easiest. So if I'm approached by 100 authors a year, how do I get my book published? I'd say 75% of them are children's books. It's just, that's the thing that people try to do the most. And yet the classics really sell, Goodnight Moon and so on, Dr. Seuss, whatever. So breaking into the industry is extremely difficult. Breaking into the industry and selling is extremely, extremely difficult. Breaking into the industry and selling 2 million copies or whatever he sold is extremely, 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 he's like this black swan. So all those comments about success, it's really hard to fit that into your brain. I've also seen that it can affect the work if you try and swallow it, because you think you ought to, because it's very rare, because you should pay the scale tribute, because the work requires quiet and weird moods. Yeah, he kind of I love that thoughtfulness. He goes this way, he goes that way. And then he flips it on you and he says, but I do think it means I get to try weird things. I mean, on my shelf behind me right now, I have The Skull. Have you read The Skull? I mean, it's got to be one of the weirdest children's books you'll ever read. Period. Full stop. And the fact that it was allowed to be published in such high quality paper and in color, and is done well, it's such a sign of this guy's genius. Astrid Lindgren, your estate, genius. You picked the right guy. I like the quote, I try to try things out. I like the try before the try. We'll do a short one after the long one. I think I've become more and more distrustful of language generally. And that's where he talks about the turtles and the eyes and how do you communicate without communicating and all that stuff. It's just amazing. It's true. Me too. Aren't you distrustful of everything? The news, what's objectively happening, what's on screens, and now language, you know? Maybe in the post-AI world, we're going to just connect and trust each other. That's it. Like our voices, our eyeballs, our skin, our smells, our touch, our affectations, our affections. Getting into the word of the chapter now. Don't want to get there yet. And yes, there's going to be a word cloud, but only on audio. So if you're watching this on YouTube, jump over to audio, because in the audio version of this show, I don't do like freemium. I don't say like pay and you get transcripts, pay and you get. I don't do that yet. Maybe I will one day. For now, I just say on the audio, on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on wherever you listen to podcasts, the audio, we go real deep. We go letters, we go phone calls, we go words of the chapter. But on YouTube, I'm just like trying to, hang out with this YouTube algorithm here. And also like, do I want to have everybody's phone calls and letters just on the internet on video forever? I don't know. So I just stick it with quotes. Any more quotes? Any more quotes jump out? You're not the writer necessarily that you'd like to be. You're someone else completely, or something else completely. I thought that was great. How about this one? My best stuff, or at least the stuff I'm proudest of, is when it really surprises me completely. I love that. I can relate to that. When you get to the end, he's so astute about articulating that emotion as a writer. It's like when you get to the end of like a certain turn or phrase, you're like, you get the little moment of joy, writers. You know what I'm talking about. That's it. That's the winner for everybody else. This one, I'm very nervous as a writer, and I think I've learned to count on that as a thing that drives it. That's interesting. Because, when I feel anxiety, I'm like, how do I get rid of this anxiety? But he's like channeling anxiety, if you want to call that nervousness. And he's like, this is it. This is my fuel, I guess it depends how high, how much you value the work and creative output over your physiological contentment, perhaps. I don't know. It's a good question. We could ask him on interview 2 in the second 22-year-long version of this project that we'll get to when I'm in my 80s. There's a lot more quotes here. I could go on and on. I got pages of quotes, but that's enough. Thank you so much to Mr. Jon Klassen for giving us 3 more books to add to our top 1,000. If you go to 3books.co/the top 1,000 or just click the top 1,000 button at the top, you will see that we've been counting down the 1,400 books since 2018. So we're like coming up on a decade almost here. And yet we're not even at the 500 mark yet. But we're getting close, including number 528, The Little Trilogy by Anton Chekhov, Chakhov. I think that's our second. Is that our second Chekhov on the list, everybody? What do you think? As I know David Mitchell, chapter 58 with David Mitchell, he added The Duel. That was number 829. Yes, it is. We got 2 Chekhovs on the list now. That's epic. And then he added number 527, Outer Dark by Cormac McCarthy. Is that our first Cormac McCarthy? No. Can it be? Is it? Wow. I think it is. I don't think anyone's added The Road yet. Maybe that'll be coming sometime soon. Who knows? And number 526, Dominic by William Steig. You know what? I love William Steig. It's also our first William Steig. Nobody's added Shrek yet. Nobody's added a pizza yet. If you want a good kid's book for like a 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, or 5-year-old in your life, I highly recommend Pete's, P-E-T, apostrophe S, Pete's, possessive of Pete, the boy. Pete's a Pizza, P-I-Z-Z-A. Pete is a pizza, but Pete's a pizza. And it's a great book. And it's a great book as a board book, as a big book. You want to make a kid happy? Get him pizza. But I will say, I love the Little Trilogy. That one I would rate personally like 8 out of 10. Outer Dark I would rate 10 out of 10 with an asterisk as like highly recommended. And Dominic I would rate like a 9 out of 10. Maybe I should start giving my ratings out of 10 at the end of each show. What do you guys think? Let me know. 1-833-READ-A-LOT. Give me a call. I always love hearing from you. If you aren't sure if you should call, please do. Don't worry, I won't play anything on the air unless we both love it. So, I guess this is it. I guess this is goodbye. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. Thanks so much for being on 3 Books, being a 3-booker, listening to our crazy giant podcast. I don't know what I'm doing here, guys. I don't know. But if you made it to the end, maybe you don't know either. Let's not know together. Thank you so much for listening.